I didn't realize I was being bullied, but the way I was being bullied, and it's unfortunate because I remember talking to an HR person, not at Disney, someone else, and she said, unfortunately, you hear, and she said, was your boss a female? I said, yeah. She's like, you'd be surprised, but there's a lot of stories of that, of female
Mhm.
bosses bullying.
Three, two, one, yeah!
After leaving the corporate 9 to 5 grind, I became the boss of my own spiritual business, helping others explore and navigate the human experience from insight, wisdom, and lessons learned along the way. Today, I help aspiring spiritual entrepreneurs gain the confidence to share their gifts with the world. Welcome to the Happy Healing Shop podcast. I'm your host, Trang Pham Nguyen, and each week we'll dive into incredible stories of strength, resilience, and transformation. So, if you are ready for some serious breakthroughs, laughs and tears, and stories that will inspire you, you are in the right place, my friend. Let's get started. In this episode of the Happy Healing Shop podcast, we do have some adult language and the topic of self-harm is mentioned, so please listen with care.
So when I moved to LA, it was when I got a job for an executive assistant at NBCUniversal. But at that time, they're going through company changes. So everyone that was hired on was just a contractor, whether
Okay.
you're an engineer or whatever. So it was a technology group. So it was like a team of 40 and it was fine until I got laid off. And so I think that was the first, and that was like the first office. No, I've had other office jobs before, but that was the first one where I was working full time, really in office for an American company. And I think that, and I think anyone that loses their job, it's definitely like a big pivotal moment because obviously your money's cut off. And I was a contractor, so there was no severance pay. Like my paycheck was zero. It's bad timing. I just moved to my new apartment, and I also just bought a bunch of furniture just to furnish it. And this is probably like, yeah, 2 weeks later, I found out like I think I was being laid off. And so it was just horrible. I fell into a depression. Um, Even things like um internet. Like I didn't have internet because I think I was sharing it with a neighbor. Or how did I? Oh no, the way I used internet was hotspotting off my work phone. That's how I use internet. And so after losing a job, and had let that phone, I had to figure out something. And this is where I think when you're in survival mode, it has pros and cons. So when you're in survival mode, you kind of make decisions, not the smartest ones, because you're just like, I just need to survive, right? Not what's
Yeah.
aligned with me. And then the pro to that is you learn how to really quickly how to become resourceful. Like
Right.
you find ways to stretch things, make things work. And so I was like, oh, the library has internet. I could use the library. So I would go to the library almost every day to apply for jobs.
Right.
And I would be in the corner crying because I was like, I was so stressed, so worried about how am I going to make rent? How am I going to, I have $0 as my paycheck now, so I have no cushion. So I applied, I just spam applied, when you just apply the same resume to so many jobs and that stuff. And that was probably, it felt like forever, but that was like 2, 3 months of depression. And um, yeah, that was a bad time. So I got a call back from Disney for international marketing for an executive assistant role. And so I took it, went through the interview process, went through 3 rounds of interviews, and I took it because it's the only one that I got. And I remember going in and it was tough environment. 2 months in, I was having dinner with my friend. She's like, oh, your jaw clicks when you chew. It's just it makes a clicky noise. And I didn't realize it, but looking back now, my body was already stressed 2 months into the job. And my body was, on the outside, you're like, okay, I'm just learning, I'm okay. Like it's a learning curve, blah, blah, blah. But um that's where, I worked there on that team for about a year and 8 months. And it was looking back now, it was terrible. But people are kind of sucked into Disney, and how do I say this? You get free passes sometimes, here and there to get into, it's kind of like the golden handcuffs, right? Like the benefits are the golden handcuffs and people stay. Um, but I didn't realize I was being bullied, But the way I was being bullied, and it's unfortunate because I remember talking to an HR person, not at Disney, someone else, and she said, unfortunately, you hear, and she said, was your boss a female? I said, yeah. She's like, you'd be surprised, but there's a lot of stories of that, of female bosses bullying, other females
Yeah.
beneath them. And the way the bullying works is, I think some people say like, well, isn't it obvious and just leave? It's not that. It's very subtle. It's like slow, gets under your skin
Yeah.
slowly, that other people around me couldn't even see it really. And then I remember an intern joining on my team, maybe, just months and months later. And maybe 1 or 2 weeks in, he came up to me, he's like, man, your boss, like, she's really vulgar with you. And I remember thinking like, vulgar is probably not the right word. I think he meant like condescending or mean,
Okay.
because I think it's different when your boss or someone is mean to everyone versus mean to just you and like 2 other people on the team. It's very targeted. And I think that's the difference, but it doesn't give a reason. Like I'm sure, those people, my ex-boss had traumas and that kind of stuff growing up, but it's not okay. I remember someone telling me, but it's not okay to treat someone else like that.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of, in a way, I guess, I don't know if the right word is called gaslighting, but I would bring my work to her. Let's say she's like, I want these flights and everything. And I would bring all the flights the travel agent showed me, and even the ones I found online, and have it all like, perfectly in a chart, ready to go. And she'd be like, are you sure? It really, how do I say this? It really was like Devil Wears Prada, except more subtle. So people really didn't see it, or some people that worked there for years are like, well, that's the way it is here, and I think it's just that acceptance of, because Disney's very hierarchical, like very hierarchy. People will treat you very differently based on your title. So of course, if you're an executive assistant, you're at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then I remember being very suicidal, maybe a year and a half in. I was really depressed, probably like a few months in, and just going in and like, how did I say this? So I would go into work usually at 9, sometimes 8 a.m. to set up a call. And I would go home at 7. From 5 to 7 p.m. There was really nothing to do, but she just wanted me to be there. And I remember she was like, yeah, you can go. If you have a dinner, you can go to it. But like the tone made it sound like, yeah, you can go to it, but it wasn't okay to go. Do you know what I mean? When they say it's fine, just let me know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't okay. So it was that. And I think there was the frustration there in working at places like this, is the abuse of power. So I remember just going home from work, like at 7 p.m., getting home 7:30. Some days I would get home at 8 or maybe 8:30. And I would just cry on the way home. And then I would work out for like 20, 30 minutes, eat dinner while crying, take a shower, and then cry myself to sleep. And that was my day, like maybe 3 to 5 times a week, just after work. And I don't know, I guess you didn't even, it's funny because you didn't even know me. We didn't know each other back then. But I was living like the floor above you, right? And then I think a year, and it kind of eats away at you every day, and eventually months and stuff like that. And you don't realize it. And that's how I think people in, let's say, abusive relationships, romantic relationships, you see them lose themselves, because it doesn't happen overnight. It's really slow. It picks at you really slow. And other people can't see it, or other people would be like, oh, are you sure? Like John Smith, your boyfriend seems really nice and stuff. And you're like, yeah, but they're really good at acting. And so kind of really same thing here. They're like, oh, I didn't know you're my ex-boss. They're like, oh, I didn't know she was like that. She seems so funny in meetings. Like she jokes all the time and stuff like that. And I'd be like, yeah, you don't know what she says about you guys behind closed doors though. It was very toxic. It was very like Mean Girls vibe. And I was also supporting another SVP and both of them, they both like to just gossip and stuff like that about other executives. It was just really not a great team. And there were some people on the team that really, they did have good hearts though. So, and then also during my time there, because someone was on maternity leave, that's how I actually met, there's a temp contractor that came on, and that's how I met my ex-business partner. And then we were working alongside a conference, and everyone was in the session, and we were just talking outside. And somehow I started talking about how my grandpa used to be he was a palm reader, and I found so fascinating. And then she opened up and revealed that she's psychic, and that's how. And she felt so uncomfortable with it, being like, oh, like I'm not ready to like share that with the whole world. And for me, I was like, that's so cool, because I was into that stuff. And so that's how we became friends and business partners, because eventually, fast forward later, we're like, let's just do psychic night and practice your stuff, right? I'll just bring in some of my friends and we could do tarot readings and mediumship, talk with their afterlife, with their loved ones in the afterlife. And so that's how Happy Healing Shop started. And then in a few, so there were actually like two other bullies that were, or actually two mean girls on the team, and they eventually pushed her out, saying she ruined the campaign and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it takes a lot to ruin a campaign, like a whole entire movie campaign, that and so, but she got pushed out eventually too, unfortunately. And it was like a very bad time for her. So she was bullied, and I've been bullied for like, this is probably over a year going on now. And I think it was 2008 2018. Yeah, it was July 2018. And during that time, that probably May, June, July, I've been applying for jobs just to get out, because they say, at Disney, like, we like to promote people, we like to see growth for our employees, yada, yada, yada. They say that. But in reality, a lot, like, if you're applying for another role, so are 50 other Disney employees trying to apply for that role, right? So even though it's a big company, there's still a lot of competition. Yeah. And I think I hate when there's like false hope kind of given to us, especially during orientation. We just started and we're like, we can grow up, and everyone wants to seem to grow up, climb up the ladder and grow up the ranks, right? Yeah. But after a year, I remember someone telling me, just do your year and just leave, or do your year and then you're set to go. Or these are scripts that were told from other people that in a way they mean well, but looking back now, it was probably not the healthiest thing to say. Or even like someone saying like, oh, that's a good name on your resume, but nowadays looking back now, you're like, oh, that's such old school advice, because nowadays you can see everyone's a digital nomad, or not everyone, but a lot of people are. And since the pandemic, it's like people can work abroad, they could work overseas. There's remote jobs now. And so like, if you just want to be like I'm trying to think of a remote job, like an IT person, and work remotely, you don't necessarily have to have Disney on your resume, Yeah. So it's like, if you want to work for other bigger corporations, maybe, but again, it was just like all these things that were said to me. And I was like, okay, I think that's what made me stay longer as well. And so, but a year and a half, and I started looking for jobs like frantically, and, doing everything that everyone said, go to temp agencies, apply for jobs, all that kind of stuff. But I got like a few callbacks, but didn't make it to the final round. And I remember thinking like, and me, Sam, I'm like a pretty proactive person. So I'm like, I'm going to get myself out of the situation. But at that point I was like, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because I'm like, I'm doing everything. I'm trying, like, I don't know what else I can do. And so, and if I quit at that moment, you're like, if I quit, then what do I do financially with living in my current apartment, So, so yeah, I remember just, when I told you like 3 to 5 times a week, I would cry going home, cry, on Sunday nights, I would dread going to work, working for her. And then I think I remember thinking, trying to plan how I wanted to take my life. I remember, because I'm a planner, right, Sam? So I was like, okay, going through the options. So I was like, okay, well, I can't do meds, I can't do drugs. That's kind of painful, actually, because I think people think like in the movies, when you just take a bunch of drugs, you just pass out, but your body starts convulsing and all that stuff because it's overdose. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't work. And then I started going through and I was like, well, I don't want to hang myself, because that doesn't seem quick and painless. I want to be quick and painless, right? And then I remember thinking, okay, well, it seems like the gun is the next option. And I remember thinking, there's a few things that stopped me. One, I did not know how to get a gun. I know people said it's easy, but it's just, They say it's easy to get in America, but I think I was just like, what if they know that, what if they're like, what's this 5'2" Asian trying to go into a gun store and buying it? That's odd. Like, and if they ask for me, like, like, oh, what are you shooting? What caliber or whatever? I'd be like, I don't know. I'm gonna be
Right.
found out, so that's one thing that kind of stopped me. And then the other one was, the reason why I was telling my parents' story was like, I remember thinking, I cannot do this to my dad, after all he's gone through. And then to have an officer knock on his door and be like, hey, we found out that your daughter killed herself in her apartment. I don't think any parent ever wants, no parent expects their child to die before they do. So that, I think that memory just stuck in my head on those like really difficult days. And I'm sure my spirit guides were like, pull the emergency memories. And they flood, like, they put those memories in me to be like, okay, you can't, just make it to the next day. I remember a friend saying this to me, where it was like, people don't want to die, they just want to stop the pain. Oh God, you're frozen. Okay. Sorry. Like, I remember a friend telling me, like, people don't want to kill themselves, they just want to stop the pain. And I could relate to that, so that was, I remember, you met my friend Victoria, and that time I didn't WhatsApp, I didn't like text her, I was kind of like really quiet for a while. And I know that she knew that I was not in a good place. And or she knew I was very frustrated, because she was also an assistant too. And so she knew, like, being an assistant can be really shitty job, because you get dumped with a lot of things that you really shouldn't be, and you get treated like crap a lot of times too. And so with that, I remember that weekend she, I think, shipped me a box of Godiva chocolates, because she knows I like chocolate. It came to me to work on Monday, but I remember that weekend specifically because I remember thinking those chocolates at work and just still feeling numb, being like, I just felt, I know you're trying to make me feel better, but this barely helps, But that weekend I was very suicidal, where I was, I just kept thinking about it over and over. And so I was thinking, oh, that would have been sad if I actually went through with it. And then on Monday, the chocolates got to me, and then she would have been like, oh no, they didn't come to me on time.
Blamed herself.
Yeah. So that was that. And then in July, everyone was out for, the office is pretty empty for July 4th that week. So there was one HR lady where I was like, okay, I trust her. And she's seen only, I think people just at work saw the bubbly side of me, because I'm always like, yeah, I'm ready to help, or I'm like, hi, what do you need? So I don't think they would be surprised if they knew how I felt inside, how miserable I was. And then I just emailed her one day and I said, hey, can I talk with you? And she said, okay. And then I booked this like conference room on the far side of the building that no one knew. And when I went there, I closed all the windows so no one can see. I was just very paranoid. I was like, oh, I want to be really discreet, like super secret agent as possible. And when she came, she's like, what's up? Oh, I didn't even know this conference room existed. And I knew I had like my notes ready and everything like that. Cause I know with HR, how they work is that you have to have the evidence, you have to have the notes and everything, because they investigate. So you can't just say like, oh, they're just treating me bad. They'll ask like, how so? And then when she said, oh, what's going on? And then I just cried and bawled. And I think she was so caught off guard. And she's like, oh my gosh, like what, because I don't think she's ever seen me like upset or like angry or miserable at work. And so at that point, I just told her, like, while blubbering through my like crying, like all my notes and everything of how she treated me, the things she said and everything. I had like, it is kind of like going to court where they're like, what is the evidence, right? And so she's like, okay, do you have a paper and pen so I can take notes? And I was like, yeah, here you go. I had everything ready. And then, when we were done, it was probably like an hour meeting. And when we were done, She said, from woman to woman, you know, I just want to let you know, whatever you do that makes you happy will always be the right answer. So obviously she wouldn't tell me to like quit or anything like that. But so, and she said, I'm gonna have to bring this to employee relations and they will investigate it, so what they do is how they investigate. I learned this through Disney. I learned this while I was at Disney. They call people on the team that you suggest calling to kind of be like, hey, we've heard this was going on with, you know, the VP and Trang, like, can you tell us more about it? Is it true? And that kind of stuff. And luckily I had some coworkers that really did back me up. Obviously, like they're happy to back you up anonymously, but they're not the type to like outwardly say it in front of everyone's face, right? So I think there's like a bit of fear of that. Like you don't want to jeopardize your career and your possible promotion, right? So I was really grateful for them. I always will be for them for backing me up there. And then what Disney does is they kind of talk to the let's say the VP, the person that was in trouble, and also their boss. So I know for her, she, I would say in marketing, but for her, she definitely was about image and looking good and that kind of stuff. And so when she found out her boss, I think found out about it, I think she was like caught off guard or like I don't know how she felt, but I definitely like uncomfortable, right? But I think what was awkward was after that situation, she pretty much got a talk being like, you can't, from HR being like, you can't do this. We'll have a mark on your record now, but we're giving you a chance to like pretty much I guess to say redeem yourself and not do this. But for me, it was so awkward knowing that she knew that someone told on her and now I'm still working under her, So that was really, and I think the lesson here really was the universe being like, you need to speak your truth. You need to speak up for yourself. And that's why we're not letting you get any jobs right now. Like there's like, no matter how hard I tried and not have people step on you like that. And then what else is there? So in a way, I think I broke the cycle because I heard that her previous assistant also one day broke down and broke down as well. So I don't know if she was suicidal, but she left obviously the job for obvious reasons. And when the weird part is like afterwards, when my boss, my ex-boss, when I moved to another department, there was a reorg and her office wound up being next to where I sat, like the new place. So I couldn't even escape her. So, and I saw how she treated her new assistant and she was definitely nicer to her. And in a way I was really angry about it because I remember thinking like, why couldn't you have treated me that way? And also to the new assistant in my head, I was like, I hope you know how, in a way, I hope you know how good you had it. Or I hope you know like how much like the reason why is like, I had to speak up. So you and everyone else after her doesn't have to go through that. Right. So yeah.
Did she ever say anything to you afterwards about you?
No,
Like,
she's so awkward. Even on my last day, there were moments where, oh God, I feel like I have notes or something in my notebook, but it was like even moments where like this, where it was admin appreciation day. And so me and a few other admins and coordinators on the team were up there and her and the other SVP who was also mean, and Caddy, they came upstairs and they hugged the coordinator. And they didn't, but that was it. And then like, she just looked at me and that was it. She's like, well, happy, happy assistant day. It was very awkward where, when you go to a party and imagine like you had this person hugging everyone and then they just looked at you and they're like, oh, hi, Sam, like that. And you're like, okay. And there's little things like that where I should pull out my book of notes, but there are things like that where you can tell there was either not favorite. It was very targeted people, very targeted. Maybe like a month later, it felt like forever, the same HR lady came up to me in the kitchen and she said, hey, and she took me aside and said like, there's someone in the finance department. He just got promoted from director to VP. So he's looking for an assistant and he's looking for someone internal. He doesn't want to look for someone external because he wants someone that already knows how Disney works. And I was like, okay. And I remember feeling scared because, and this is where I think it really plays with your brain. I remember thinking, what if he's a bad boss like, should I leave? What if he's a bad boss, And, but the thing is, it would have to be a super bad boss to like a really terrible person to even beat like the person I'm currently working under. Right. But you have that fear because you just think like, what if it is worse than my situation? But luckily I had, I was friends with other assistants. And so I would ask around being like, is he a nice person? They're like, oh yeah, he's a family man. He's a dad. He coaches his daughter's softball games. And he also treats the assistants equally. He doesn't treat us like below, like, which is what a lot of people do. And I said, okay. I still had a little bit of fear, but after assistants kept saying like, oh yeah, he's nice. And what was helpful was HR. She said like, I already put in a word for you. So, just email him. He knows that you're going to reach out to him. So she kind of let it like really set it up really well. I still had to go through the interview process. Fast forward, I did get the job. And I remember I was surprised I didn't cry. I remember just feeling, I wouldn't say numb, but just thinking, am I really leaving? Oh my gosh, am I really leaving this toxic this toxic department? And that was it. That was like my reaction, just kind of like stunned in a way. And on my last day, she didn't even give me a hug or anything, or she's just like, well, I guess I will see you around, well, I guess I'll see you around then. And then it's like, all right, bye. And then she like left to go to her car.
That's very cold of her. That's all.
She was a cold person. There's certain people you talk to and you're like, oh, there's warmth from them.
Yeah.
For her, it was very like cold, like there was a wall. And in the moment in the interview, I didn't really see it. I thought of it as like, oh, they're just a bit weird or quirky or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, I really need a job. Survival. So you make the decision based on survival instead of being like, I don't know. Like now, obviously, if I interview with someone like that, I would be like, no, because even at that moment, I didn't know how close an executive assistant works with an executive, right? So like you're on call a lot of times and you work after hours, or they might text you needing something. And so it's just one of those things where like, if it was like with a nice boss, like the one in finance, I got to go, my hours were 9 to 5. So I actually had a social life afterwards. So, working under the toxic boss, I didn't have a social life. I barely did. Yeah. And sometimes when I was at a dinner, I would get a call from her being like, hey, I need this and that. So I would have to run off to the bathroom and take care of something. It was just very stressful, but also just toxic on top of it. I think if it was a nice boss, it's different because you're like, yeah, sure, I'll do things for you. Like I'm happy to do it. But it was just very toxic boss, which makes toxic department as well. Yeah. In fact, it was toxic where there were conference calls they had with other countries because it was international marketing. And the two executives would mute and say, oh my God, like how stupid is Nancy? She is so annoying. Yeah, and then they would unmute it and be like, but they would do this in front of the whole entire team. Wow. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is very unprofessional. But at the same time, they are executives and they're in the positions for role. They know how to play the politics and everything. But it was very, it was Mean Girls. That's the best way to put it. So, and then fast forward, I worked on finance, and that was a game changer. People on the team were nice. And what I loved about the finance team that I worked on was all the ladies were nice. Whereas the other team, it was opposite. So this one was very refreshing where people, some people say, oh, it's very catty to work with women, but this is with a team where I was like, wow, the women support each other, and genuinely cared for each other. When someone got engaged, someone would be like, should we do something for their engagement? Nice. Or, oh, their birthday's coming up. Should we do something? It was very just night and day. Yeah. So that really, I grew closer to the women there. And so, yeah, that's, and then through the pandemic, me and one other person got laid off. So at that point you figure out what to do with the resources, or even thinking like, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to lose my apartment, and filing for unemployment. And eventually I moved to my aunt and uncle, and they have 2 cousins. So 2 boys. And I remember moving in, and I remember crying with my therapist because I was like, I'm losing my place that I hosted, had friends over, like those, that. And also And then I also cried because I was like, I'm not gonna see Sam anymore. Like I can't just go down for dinner and be like, let's just hang out and talk. Because we did that regularly, during the
Yeah.
pandemic, at the point where we were pretty much housemates, just with stairs blocking us.
Yeah, and I'm
But
like losing a vital dinner source at the same time. I kid, and a great friend.
yeah, likewise. But yeah, and so I think now it's just I I started getting to wedding planning because I was always doing events already. So I was doing conferences. I've done even a wedding for my friend. And once I did a wedding for my friend as a maid of honor, I realized like, oh, is this what wedding planning is? I know how to do it. And that's how
Yeah.
it kind of prompted me. And then each year I just keep getting a few more weddings and more weddings and more weddings. And I have fun with it. There's always like some pros and cons dealing with parents and people and stuff like that. But in terms of planning, it comes very easily to me. Whereas other people, I realize it's overwhelming. So really now it's doing freelancing. I also make websites for other spiritual entrepreneurs and stuff like that. So I realized the things that keep behind the scenes running, or even things that are providing structure for people, or even making people feel calm, like the bride and groom, they're stressed. And I'm like, don't worry, we got it. It's a lot of that. That's what I notice, a theme of the stuff that I work for, like in my freelance right now. But as you know, I ditched you for like 3 months and I went to Australia working remotely. So there is like a silver lining to it, right? And just not realizing how much I love this freedom and not having to, I wouldn't say having to report to someone, because there are good bosses that you can
Yeah.
report to, right? That makes it a very beautiful, pleasant experience in the workplace environment. But having that flexibility of, and I love travel. So I remember thinking this year, I am so grateful that I had this chance to do this, because not many people can. Some people are doing it more now because they have more remote jobs. But the fact that I can do this and then come back, start work weddings, kind of set up my own schedule. You know me, I'm a night owl. I can sleep until 12. I can sleep at night at 3, 4 a.m. So like, there's not a lot of jobs that allow that. So there are some perks and some things like that. And so that's where I am today. And I think some people that have been on my newsletter, they know that when I moved with my family, that day I moved in, my aunt died. And then 6 months later, my uncle died from a broken heart. So now I'm living with 4 dogs and 2 guys. That's us in
Crazy.
one big house. So a little bit outside on the edge of LA. But so I think there is a lot of, looking back, things line up and there's lessons to be learned. And also, even though I lost my apartment, I was able to be there for my cousins too when there was a lot of death going on. And I noticed that's what happens with me, the universe. I see a pattern where the universe has me, whenever I have a job layoff or something shifting in my life, it happens to be at a time where I'm available to help someone else.
Mm.
So even when I was laid off from my NBC job and really depressed, I had a friend that now I call her a friend, but she was trying to move away from her Asian parents. And it was I understood where she was coming from, because it was very oppressive when you and feeling the guilt and shame, and also wanting to move and have your own life, but feeling guilt and shame from that because your parents have provided for you all these years and immigrate to America, right?
Yeah.
But I remember telling her, being like, I know what it's like, but I promise you, when you move out on your own, it will be so much better, even though you're paying rent. So financially, it's like, ugh. But
Yeah.
in terms of independence, freedom, and like your mental space, it will work out. And I remember having that deep talk with her in the car after buying IKEA stuff together, like for her, and helping her shop for her new place and helping her move in, putting her IKEA furniture together. But I was able to do that on a Friday because, and at that moment I lied to her. I was like, oh, I'm just taking off work on a Friday, but it was because I was laid off. So I just find this, it's interesting how the universe works in hindsight, where even though it felt like I was at the bottom, like a really low place, I was also in a place to help other people at that time too, and serve someone else at that time.
Man, that's a really beautiful and selfless way to look at like times of tribulation, to be honest. And I didn't know you through everything that you were going through, but I did meet you like right after some of the Disney stuff, and I couldn't tell that you were going through some of that stuff, like the way you portrayed yourself or presented yourself. And I think that says a lot about you. But also, I know you mentioned that you you had to go through some of that stuff, like through your workplace to, you know, the universe telling you to stick up for yourself, or, and the silver lining, you just pointed out how you help, it gives you opportunities to help with friends. But like, are there other things that you take out of like going through like just tough life events like repeatedly or over and over? Is that is it, do you think that there's a reason that this happens, you know, like is it to build resilience maybe, or
I think, oh, that's a good point. I think, okay, so from an astrological spiritual sense, they say there's a thing called Saturn return. From a human sense, I call it the quarter life crisis, you know, where you go through like that whole
right?
phase of what am I doing with my life? Or like, is this what I want type of thing?
Mhm.
And I'm sure the
Yeah,
pandemic did that for a lot of people, questioning everything that's been taught or what they've done. Or like, I knew when a lot of my coworkers were furloughed from Disney, like everyone knows in a corporation that you're just a number, but when that happens to you, you're like, oh, I am very just a number. This company does not care about me, even though I worked my ass off. I did overtime for them for little pay or no pay for overtime, that kind of stuff. So that was like an awakening for a lot of like a slap in the face for a lot of people. Um, and I think in a way it does build resilience. Sometimes you kind of wish, I think we talked about, like you and I talk about, like, would we rather have this all happen, all crammed in one time of our
right.
life or spread out, right? Like, how do you want the hardships spread out or all just slammed in your face all at one time to get the
Right.
lessons done and over with? And I hope that's the end of it, to be honest. I think there's going to be obviously like little bumps on the road here, but in terms of like very, you know, job loss, 3 deaths, like, you know, oh, I even forgot to talk about my mom. Like, she died in 2021. Like, she died the same time I lost my job. And I remember that was like a double whammy for me.
Yeah,
Um, but again, because I didn't have a job, I was able to help my dad out and fly back home to Virginia,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a, you know, and so it was really hard because my
And
mom
he
died
needed you.
unexpectedly. Yeah, yeah. And it was like not for COVID.
Yeah.
Went in for like a hip surgery, whatever, and kind of she became a vegetable because she got a stroke after the surgery. And we think it was malpractice, but we tried, but we couldn't win the case, or we couldn't go through with the case. Because the lawyer was like, there's not evidence to support it. Although I have a cousin that's an anesthesiologist, so he works in a hospital, and he's like, the records don't match up. Like, if my patient doesn't wake up within an hour after surgery, I check up on them.
Right.
But for during the records, I was doing the math, they'd checked up on her like maybe 8 to 10 or 12 hours after the surgery. Like, yeah, the heart rate is going, but the brain was like, you know, so if they could they have prevented the stroke from happening? Maybe, you know,
Yeah.
from getting that bad. So she was a vegetable, and I'll have another episode for death, talking about death, but that was a huge hit for my dad, for me being angry with my brother because he didn't help out. So there's at all. And so I kind of was I was the responsible child again, playing that role. So that was that. And then, you know, so my mom died, and then my aunt and uncle died the following year. So it was just, I guess it builds a lot of like, for me, I know everyone deals with death differently, but for me, I feel like I'm kind of, not want to say deathed out, but just more of like, if someone dies, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's, and I don't say I don't take it as hard as people, but I think it's exposure. It's like resilience, right? When you've been exposed to it, or when people have been laid off 5 times in a row
Right.
already in a job, they know the emotions they're going to go through, I think, or they know they should start looking for a job. They know that it happens often in life, and they're not caught off guard by it. Whereas when it happens to someone for the first time, then I think that's where people it's a hard hit for people.
Yeah.
So in a way, it is building resilience because you're familiar with it, or you know how to. But that's where I also am an advocate for therapy too, because you also can, with a good therapist, sometimes there are therapists that are bad, but they
Yeah.
can help you process it. So in the future, when it happens again, you know, you will be able to handle it in a healthier way. So even with my mom dying, my therapist wanted to make sure that she was concerned about me, and I actually process it quite fast. And I think part of it's also my thoughts about the afterlife and spirituality are a bit different from other people. And she also said, you've done a lot of the inner work. So I went through therapy during Disney. I went when I was after I left my old boss, because I started having PTSD symptoms, like the dreams, like the my body would freeze up when I saw her in the hallway. So yeah, that's how I started getting to therapy. And ever since then, I just loved my therapist. She's really good at what she does. And so I just maintain her. Like, even if I'm not going through anything, I still keep it as it's like working out. You keeping up with a workout. You don't want to work out when you're 1,000 pounds. You want to work out when you're like, oh, I'm a little bit overweight, but I want to like make sure I'm in the okay zone. Right.
Preventative.
So preventative,
Mhm.
So it was nice when you were talking about seeing your therapist, and it was just easy to talk about, like no judgment or anything like that,
Yeah.
and in a way, that way we're processing it with someone that's a professional, and also we're not accidentally dumping it on someone,
Exactly.
like a friend that doesn't know what to do with
Mhm.
it. So yeah, that's where I am in my life. That is my story in a nutshell. That's not even a nutshell. It's like a
Man,
full episode,
it's tough to squeeze it into an episode. It's a lot going in. I'm sure you'll get
right?
into it on future
So I
episodes.
feel like yeah. And I feel like if anyone has comments or questions or wants to just me to expand on so many topics to talk about in this podcast series, and like DM me, comment down below, or message me, because I am happy to talk about, but I want to make sure it's what people want to hear as well.
Mm.
But yeah, so I think in the past couple of years, it's been a triple, quadruple whammy for me. And in a way, it makes you mature a lot faster than I think you'd want to. But as my aunt once said, we have to learn to play with the cards that we are dealt in this lifetime, or we're the cards that God gave us. That's how she worded it. And I was like, okay. That was me when I was like much younger. And
Right.
when you remember it and you're like, oh yeah, I can see what you mean now.
Mm.
And then yeah, it's crazy. Like, you were just 30 feet away from me, and there I was laying on my living room floor crying, being like
I'm sorry.
suicidal.
I'm trying to laugh at you. The image, though. I can't get the image out of my head. I'm down
So,
here
you guys,
playing the
this is
video
how
game. I'm down here playing 2K laughing. I'm sorry.
and this is our friendship. Yep.
Wondering
And
when
this is
she's gonna drop some food off at my door.
no, this is guys, this is even before we met. But yeah, was I out? And I think I was at Disney, but maybe in the other department, and that's
Okay.
where we met or
Yeah, I
something
think
like
that's
that.
when yeah.
Yeah. So when I was going the hard times, I think for a moment you didn't even move in yet. It was
Okay.
maybe you did, but we never saw each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was up there crying my eyes out and bawling and trying to figure out what to do in my life, and there you downstairs being like, go shoot.
You're right. No, but glad we eventually met, man. And you've been
Yeah.
been an awesome friend. And hearing your perspective on life, someone who's gone through different things than I've gone through, and it helps you kind of get out of your own head and understand there are people going through other things, and the fact that you're selfless in a lot of your experiences really, I feel like it brings a lot of meaning to some experiences, because you're such an open book sometimes and willing to share your experiences and thoughts, and I think it's beautiful. I just want to say that as a friend.
Oh, thanks, Sam. I never thought of it that way, but
Yeah.
thank you. Because I'm just crying in my bedroom.
Yes. No. And you handle it with a lot of grace, to be honest. I know I wasn't there for a lot of the Disney, but we were friends during some of your loss, and you were honest about it, but man, you were really graceful with how you handled it, how you helped your family, your dad and your cousins, and Man, that's inspiring, and it helps you understand that these things do mentally prepare you for events in your life, unexpected events.
Yeah. And also giving insight for someone that might be going through it for the first time or even the second or third time, and they just
Right.
need help coping with it.
Mm.
I think especially with this death, it's one of those things where it's easier to talk to someone that's already been through it because it's like unspoken words. You don't even need to say anything. And thanks, Sam. Thanks for being on this show to kind of like bounce any questions off of me as I'm blurting out my life story. But yeah, so grateful for you.
Anytime, anytime.
And that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story and listening to one of the lowest points of my life. If you or a loved one is going through a difficult time and need someone to talk to, you can call or text 988, which is the mental crisis hotline. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button right now so you won't miss out on any episodes coming up. And it will really help us reach more of our vibrant community. There are also more resources at thehappyhealingshop.com to help and support you on your spiritual journey. Until we meet again, my friend, always, always remember to shine your light brightly and share your story, because you'll never know who it can help or inspire to create a change in their own world. Thank you so much for listening and being here, and I'll see you soon.